I'm Sarah Schulz, and this is People Over Politics. I'm running for the Michigan House in the 98th District, which includes parts of Bay and Midland counties. Over the next 11 months, we will be talking to friends and neighbors in our district about the issues that matter to regular folks like you and me. Today, we will be discussing the high cost of prescription drugs and the effects of those costs on our lives. This issue touches so many people in our community and across the state and across our country. It impacts people with and without health insurance, people who are chronically ill and those who are not. It impacts people of all economic status and across the political spectrum. I know that I hear about this issue quite a lot when I'm out talking to folks in the community. It has impacted me personally a few times. I'm lucky to say that my family is pretty healthy, but I've been shocked personally at the prices of things like Tamiflu for my daughter when she had the flu. And even with our good health insurance, it cost us $211. And my son, who had a walnut allergy, had his EpiPens cost over several $100s. So I understand when parents say that they have to choose between medication for their kids and their mortgage payments. What a horrible choice to make. So the folks that we have today here to talk about this important issue are Lisa Rivera. Did I say your name right? Rivera. She's a cancer and bone marrow transplant survivor. And Elena Smith. She's a student and a direct care worker, a direct care professional who works at an adult care facility. Dr. Jennifer Deere. She's a family practice doctor in Sanford, and Dr. Philip Harris, who's an ENT doctor from Midland. Welcome to all of you, and thanks so much for joining me to talk about this really important issue. So I'd love to start with Lisa. Lisa, I understand that you were diagnosed last year with T-cell lymphoma and that your sister was a bone marrow match for you and you were able to get a transplant. So first, let me just say that I'm really sorry that that happened to you and all that you went through last year, and I'm so glad that you're here with us today. I heard that, and I understand that you are on about 10 or 12 medications to keep your cancer in remission and to help with the host graft situation and complications. Would you mind talking with us about your health journey and what you went through and what your status is today?
Yes, I'll be more than happy to. It started off with just sinus infections. I was constantly going to the doctor, referred to an ENT. I went to an acupuncturist. I had to go to an allergist because I thought initially it was allergies, but I kept getting sinus infections monthly, and the dosage that they were prescribing me at the time was not working. Things escalated around Christmas of 2017. I was hospitalized, and on the advice of my ENT, they admitted me and did further testing, and I was diagnosed with adult T-cell lymphoma. The tumor was found in my sinuses, which is why I was having all those problems and complications. With the severity of the situation, I had to relocate back to Midland, which is where I grew up. At the time, I was living in Florida working at Disney World. I had insurance as a part-timer through the job, so that covered initially most of my treatment, but because I was unable to work with medical leave, I had to go on COBRA and pay the insurance out of pocket. So there was the cost with that, and then thankfully I was able to move in with my parents, and they used their retirement fund to help support me for the first couple months while I was applying for disability and other types of assistance. With the diagnosis, I needed a bone marrow transplant, and my sister was a match, thankfully, because the statistics for me was not looking very good. And after the transplant, I had several other complications, also with the amount of medications I was taking with the cancer treatment. And then with the bone marrow transplant, they said I was cancer-free. I'm not in remission yet, but I still go to the doctor regularly to keep up and do testing to make sure that the cancer doesn't come back, because with my family history, it's a very high statistic, and so they want to make sure they keep monitoring it. So hopefully I can make it to the 5 years and be officially in remission and cancer-free.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that story. I understand that you had to be creative, right, about the ways that you could find all of those prescription drugs that you need and
Yeah.
be able to pay for them. I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. I was pretty surprised to find that most of the medications I was taking was causing a lot of side effects, from having the flu to diabetes to being hospitalized for blood clots. And with the different prescriptions for the different ailments, I couldn't get all the coverage with the insurance, so I had to do a GoFundMe. I had to borrow money, max my credit cards out, use online like apps to cover the medications that my insurance wouldn't cover. Even with the co-pays, I was still paying, $200-300 for just one prescription. And I remember one time I had to get a prescription that they wanted urgently, but I wasn't able to get funding for it. I had to contact the pharmacy or the manufacturer to ask if they had any programs available so I could afford the medication. Still had to pay about $200 out of pocket. And with me taking 10 to 12 medications per day, not including multivitamins or any type of supplements to help with the symptoms, I definitely went through about $2,000 a month. And that was not enough to cover anything.
Oh my goodness. Now, can you talk a little bit about the financial impact that this has had on your life and your lifestyle?
Well, I am in a lot of financial debt. I had to borrow a lot of money from my parents. The GoFundMe, it's just been very stressful and very hard on everybody. Thankfully, I've had family that have given me some assistance, but outside of my parents, it's just been a lot.
Wow.
And they're older, it's an unexpected event. I had a pretty good job, a lot of stability financially, but I went through all my savings, and it's just been very hard financially to support myself.
Wow. So on top of your concerns over your own health, you layer on top of that all of the stress of the financial burden that you have from trying to cover the medications you need to just live.
Yeah, I did reach out to several organizations. American Cancer Society gave me resources to look into. The local Midland Cancer Society was very helpful as well. But, there's only so much that can be done. The leukemia services, it's just a lot of time studying and trying to find resources wherever you can across the country and locally.
Absolutely. Wow, you've been through a whole lot this year. This is just 1 year of your life, right?
2018 and this year as well, 2019.
Goodness. Oh my goodness. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing that story. I want to just turn now, I think, over to Dr. Deer. Dr. Deer, I'm sure that, I imagine you've seen cases maybe similar to Lisa's, or maybe what she's talking about resonates for you a little bit. And I'm wondering if, as a family practice physician, if you could share a little bit about any insight you have or stories you have to share about your patients who maybe have struggled with affording their medications.
Certainly. It's really not uncommon, unfortunately, that patients cannot afford the medication that they need. One of the first things we do at my office is if the prescription we would like them to take isn't covered or isn't affordable, we try to work with the insurance company to figure out if there's a cousin medication that they would rather pay for, something that's what we say on their formulary. And then if that's an appropriate medication, we switch it. Sometimes that doesn't really help. Maybe the insurance will say it is covered, but your copay is $200 or your copay is $300. Then we use an app. I think you might have been referencing this one, the GoodRx app. We can look it up, and they have an online coupon, and they'll show you different pharmacies in town, how much this coupon would be worth, what your copay would be if you went to that pharmacy. Sometimes that makes it affordable, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes we have to use a totally different medication that's really not as good and not in the same category of medication because they just really can't afford the medicine that we've prescribed.
Wow, so you as their doctor would prescribe them this medication, but because it's unaffordable, you end up prescribing something
different, or sometimes nothing at all. If you have COPD, which is a pretty common lung condition, all of those inhalers are brand name, and it's not uncommon for someone on Medicare to not really have any inhalers that are covered, so they just don't get them.
Wow. Do you have a sense of maybe what percentage of patients in your practice struggle with this cost?
Overall, I'm just going to guess it's probably somewhere around 10 or 20%.
Okay.
If you have hypertension or high cholesterol, we have a lot of generic options that are affordable that we can pick from. But if you have diabetes, I would say probably 20 to 30% of them can't afford the medicine we would prefer to give them. And again, conditions like COPD, it's probably closer to 80%.
Oh my gosh. Wow. I wonder if you have any a story to tell of maybe a patient that you've worked with in the past, obviously without divulging
Right.
their names
Right.
or information like that, but just to sort of give us a sense of the people behind this.
I have a patient who was diagnosed with an inflammatory arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, and the medication her specialist wanted to give her was very expensive, and the insurance would not cover it. And so there was back and forth, paperwork, requests, appeals. These kept being denied. She kept getting admitted to the hospital. I think a similar situation to you. The medication she had to take to try to keep the arthritis under control made her blood sugar worse. She ended up with blood clots. She ended up with multiple hospitalizations. And I believe finally had to get the medication from the manufacturer. And it was the second or third choice from the rheumatologist because
Wow.
it's not affordable if your insurance won't pay for it.
These are horrible choices to have
Right.
to make when lives are on the line.
Right.
Wow. So your practice is in Sanford,
Yes.
right? I wonder if you have a sense or an idea of how this issue might impact people who live in rural areas differently than folks who don't.
I think it's a problem in Midland as well, and many of my patients live in Midland, but a lot of my patients live in Sanford or Coleman or those communities. There's fewer pharmacies to choose from. There's, I think, just greater obstacles to getting the medication that they need and fewer resources to get
Yeah.
them.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. Dr. Harris, I imagine that you also have patients that need help with the cost of their prescription medication as well, but I also know that you yourself are a cancer survivor. So I'm wondering if you have any personal connection to this issue aside from being a physician yourself.
Sure. Well, I really appreciate what Lisa said. You know, I'm fortunate that when I was diagnosed with cancer a few years ago, I was given a very limited prognosis as well. But I was fortunate to have a very good insurance product, and also was able to get into a clinical trial, which did cover a lot of the initial cost. But you see this, unfortunately, even if you're in a standard treatment protocol, Lisa's said this very well, you know, you don't know your own prognosis. You don't know if you're going to be there tomorrow. And so you have a burden to decide, is it how much am I going to invest in the cost of my own care at the burden of other people, whether it's digging into your savings or digging into your own insurance products and leaving your spouse or family member with little resources after you're done. And if you don't make it, nothing is really proven from it, right? So when you have the fallacy is that everything's treatable, and it's not. And the other fallacy is that there'll be coverage for you, but if you lose your job or you have to go on COBRA, which is very expensive, I mean, thankfully it's there, you end up with quite a lot of unnecessary bills. So from my perspective, from my personal experience, I had a good insurance product, but I also relied a lot on clinical trials to help with that and get some of the costs from that. I can just give an example. Currently, I'm on a clinical trial. I still am being treated. And just the transportation alone, that last month, just driving to my clinical trials was over $1,000 in gas.
Wow.
Well, people aren't going to be able to afford that. And you talk about rural communities. I practice in Gladwin as well. And patients come there from Houghton Lake. They come from even further north. And you know, just the cost of the gas for them is prohibitive, let alone the medications.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, and that sort of leads me to my next question, which is other sort of examples of stories of patients that maybe that you have worked with that have been
Sure.
impacted by this.
Well, I think everybody, especially this time of year, you can see it in your own, how many people have met their deductibles and are asking their doctor or surgeon to get their procedure done this month, right? It's a common thing in American healthcare where everybody wants everything done suddenly in December because they've met their deductibles. And deductibles are so ridiculously high anymore that you, once you've met it, you want to get your bang for the buck, so to speak. That's one thing we see immediately. The other issue is, you know, people I had this week with a patient that needed a surgery, and he said to me, I can't do it because my job is undetermined as of January, and I won't have the ability to take either the time off, nor will I have the money to finance it or pay for it. You know, he would have to borrow money to have a surgery because of his copay, and he's not going to have a job to pay that off. And so it's a very horrific. We have another patient, and I asked her if it's okay if we said this, but without giving disclosure, her and her husband are being asked to pay over $2,000 a month in hospital bills that they owe. That's just impossible. Unless you're independently wealthy, it's not, and for people to think it's not going to happen to them, it's very scary to walk on thin ice like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Harris. So last but not least, I wanted to turn to Elena. Elena, I know that you had an incident at work a couple of months ago where you had to get some medication pretty quickly, and it was pretty expensive. And I also know that you have some other stories of challenges being a student without health insurance and trying to cover the daily cost of medications that you need. So I'm wondering if you'd be willing to just talk about that incident at work and just share your story.
Yeah, so I work at an adult foster care home in Bay County, and while I was working there, I was accidentally stuck with a dirty needle, and it just happened, and so I was sent to the hospital, and the hospital said that I had to take medications for a month that would significantly decrease the chances of me getting HIV from that dirty needle stick. And so I went and to get the medications and didn't think that it would be that big of a deal. And so my first barrier was trying to find the medications. I called, and no pharmacy in Midland had a single pill of either medication in stock. Neither did Saginaw, neither did Bay City, neither did Mount Pleasant. And so I ended up having to drive around, and I found out that a month's supply of the medications were $4,000. And I had to start them within 24 hours for them to be effective. So I went to, I finally found a pharmacy that had a partial dose, and I paid $1,000. And then I went to another pharmacy, and I was just going to get a couple days dose, but then they said you have to buy it in the full 30-day dose because people don't come back because it's so expensive. And so they said, well, it'll be a little over $2,000. And so I didn't know what to do, and I started crying, and I wasn't sure what to do because the doctors were saying that if I didn't take this medication, there's a good chance I could contract HIV. So thankfully the pharmacy was closed, and the pharmacist looked on his own cell phone and spent probably 45 minutes looking up a coupon from a manufacturer and was able to get me the medication for completely free.
Wow.
And I started crying and hugged him, and I was really thankful. And then I was able to come back, and I ordered the rest of the medication, and but I had to pay for the other $2,000 of the medication out of pocket. And thankfully I had the savings to do it because I was trying to save to buy a house, but most people don't have $2,000 or $4,000 savings within 24 hours. But you're being told you have to come up with the money or you could have HIV for the rest of your life. So you kind of, I borrowed money from friends, I wiped out my savings account, and then in my case, I was reimbursed by my employer, but it was about 4 months later. So, and without that, and during that time, my bank account was struggling. Because I had completely wiped out my savings to do that. And so, but that medication that I needed for my job is the same medication that a person who was sexually assaulted or who was stuck with a needle for any other reason would also need. And they would be dealing with not only the trauma and the scare that I had with the needle, but the trauma of their sexual assault. And they might be trying to find that medication and come up with $4,000 in 24 hours as well. And if it hadn't been for the pharmacist that helped me, I would have had to come up with that money, and I don't know how I would have done it. So that was kind of my big story of not having health insurance. On kind of a more day-to-day life, I have high blood pressure, and I frequently find myself like trying to stagger my pills out more to not take them as often, not going 28 hours or 30 hours instead of every 24 hours with taking them. And currently my primary care provider wants me to switch me to another one because she thinks it would be more effective, but that one requires monthly testing, and she said the testing would be about $400 a month. So that doesn't see, even though that would be better at controlling my blood pressure and that medicine might be cheaper, if you can't afford the testing that you have to get done every month, it's not really effective. So
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. A lot of these themes come down to just impossible choices, right, that people are making related to their health insurance. So you're making a choice: do I risk contracting HIV, or do I max out my credit cards and empty my bank account? Dr. Harris, you were talking about, do I make a choice of spending a lot of extra money that we didn't plan for on this treatment, while potentially harming my family for the future in our finances. Lisa, I believe you have a story of similar to Elena, sort of rationing your medication and the impact that had on you. I wonder if you could share that a little bit, that choice that you were making and like the impacts that it's having.
Oh my, yeah. So when I was receiving my chemotherapy at University of Michigan, I developed blood clots, and so they prescribed me a medication, and it was called Eliquis, and my insurance was covering it, but then with being on Cobra, I had to switch to a new insurance because the time ran out, and I didn't have a deductible yet, so the cost of the Eliquis was, usually I paid about $100, $130 a month for it, but it went up to like $4 something, and I was like, can't pay for that. And I said, well, what I'll do is I'll save up the money, and then I'll buy it in like a month or two. So I decided to go from the 2-a-day pills to maybe 1 a day, trying to stretch it out a little bit, and I wound up with blood clots in my lungs, like probably about right before I was about to buy actually the prescription, the refill. And I was in the hospital for the weekend, and my mother was like, you know, you're breathing kind of weird, you don't look very well, you should probably go to the doctor and call them and say you're having these symptoms. And I said, oh, I can stretch it out, it's fine, I can make it through this weekend, and then we'll see. It's probably just the cold. And, you know, so I was in the hospital, everybody was all scared, and, you know, the severity of a blood clot, I was not aware, and so, you know, it just kind of made everybody on edge. So now, you know, they switched me to a different medication, but I have to do weekly check-ins, and, you know, like, there's the blood testing I have to do for that, and I would like to go back on the Eliquis because I didn't have any problems or any side effects from it, but with this new medication, it's just a lot, makes me very, very tired.
Wow.
And it also interferes with my blood sugar.
Wow. So that's an example of, you know, you having to decide that you needed to ration your medication, and your life was in jeopardy from that because of the blood clot that was created.
And then the new restrictions from the new prescription of certain foods, certain things you can't take, certain times of the day. Like, it's a lot of restrictions for the lower cost that you have to trade off.
Wow. These are just impossible choices.
And that's just one medication of the many.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And these are just a small subset of the examples of the stories that I hear all the time, and we all hear in our lives about folks struggling with this issue of prescription drug costs. I have a friend who's a social worker. Elena, you're working on your MSW, I understand, so you'll understand this. And she works in the hospital, and she was telling me that she knows of patients who leave the hospital on hospice care because they can't afford the medications that would save and prolong their lives. And that is an impossible choice to have to make. So just a couple of examples of so many that people have sent to me and told me about. There's just no way to include them all. But I did want to get to some bit about solutions before our time runs out. One of the solutions we talked about a little bit, which is sort of this kind of environment around coupon apps, right? So coupons to find. Elena talked about that with the pharmacist, and Lisa, you talk about. We all sort of talked about that. It's one sort of solution, but it doesn't seem to be a very viable solution for everyone all the time, because one thing that I've heard about in the hospital is just so many people working with patients all the time and spending all this time searching up coupons. When maybe that time could have been better spent doing sort of real patient care. A couple of solutions have been proposed in the at the state level. I want to share with you a couple of them. One of them is some legislation potentially so that insurance companies would be required to cover the cost of EpiPens. It's one of the types of drugs that we hear about being really challenging. A cap to insulin of $100, a copay cap for insulin. Actually, Colorado has recently passed some legislation related to that. One thing that's been getting some interest in Michigan is allowing the importation of FDA-approved drugs from Canada, right? One thing I've heard from parents is, why do I have to go to another country to get the medical care, the drugs, the things that my family needs, my kids need? Have you done that? You've gone to Canada.
Yeah.
Right. Allowing Medicare to negotiate for lower drug prices. And then also, this one is interesting, creating a prescription drug consumer protection board, so that we have a group of folks at the state level who are paying attention to this issue and making sure that there's justification for increases in prescription drug prices, and penalizing companies who just really refuse to comply and are really looking to make profits over people's lives. So those are some solutions. How do those sound like they might help in some of the cases, some of your patients?
I think it would be very helpful.
Yeah.
I mean, every solution is good, and we need some ideas. We don't know it's perfect yet.
Yeah. I agree. I think we need some interventions, right, at the state level and the national level to really do this work. And to do that, we need people. We need to elect people to send to the State House and into Washington, D.C., who are willing to take on these issues. Because it cannot be a sort of situation of laissez-faire economics when it comes to prescription drugs and medications, because people can't make choices because the cost is too high, and not buy the drugs that they need to stay alive. So I just want to thank you all for this wonderful conversation. Our time is up for today. Thank you so much, Dr. Harris and Lisa and Dr. Deere and Elena, for sharing your stories. I know it's not always easy, right, to share your very personal stories, and I just can't thank you enough for coming here and doing that. And I just want to say that I'm looking forward to our next show, where we'll address another issue that impacts just regular people right here in the 98th District. And I hope that you join us for that, and you know that this is all about people over politics. And if you have issues that you want us to talk about on the show, or issues you want to talk with me directly about, I'm always interested in hearing your stories. And so we're going to put an email address up there on the screen, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much.